Why did the Sultan's favorite end up in a canvas sack plunged into the Bosphorus? You stand for a moment on the slippery edge of the Bosphorus, just as Mahide did, feeling the pre-dawn chill penetrate the thin cotton shift, witnessing the silent punishments of the Ottoman Harem. The water is an impenetrable black, a silent witness to 3 centuries of imperial disposal, and your wrists bound by silk. The same luxurious thread that adorned your chambers are now cold manacles. The air carries the scent of salt, rot, and a dense, unsettling residue of accumulated sorrow. You are 24, a former favorite of the Sultan, yet your status has evaporated, replaced by an absolute, terrifying expendability. The meticulous ritual of your capture, washed, oiled, dressed in white, only emphasizes the grotesque gravity of your situation, proving that the rituals of the harem extended even to death. Tonight you will smell the sharp animal fear of a woman awaiting the canvas sack. The men surrounding you are the silent agents of the palace's deep hidden state. They are the mutes serving the bosi bashi, the chief gardener, a euphemism for the palace's chief executioner. Their faces are neutral, hardened by the business of state murder, and they do not speak, which means they cannot betray what they witness, their silence being the ultimate chilling guarantee of secrecy. You can smell the sharp fear rising from your own skin, cutting through the lingering perfumes of the preparation bath, as you realize that nothing that happens to you now, the terror, the pain, the struggle, will ever be spoken of by anyone who survives to the sun's rising. For in this system, modesty no longer matters. Survival is an impossibility. What object was the silent proof that accusation is conviction in the Ottoman palace? Beside you, resting on the cold, wet stones, is the central symbol of your destruction, a heavy canvas sack, reinforced with thick leather seams, large enough to contain a human form. Since your first days in the harem, heard the whispers of this device, a cautionary tale used by older women to enforce obedience. And now it is prepared for you. The sack is not empty from within. You hear frantic sounds, dry scratching, a low hissing, the desperate, starved cries of cats moving against the coarse canvas, which you know signify the instruments of a punishment designed not just to kill, but to inflict a profound violation of dignity, ensuring every moment before death is a concentrated horror. How did one false whisper seal the fate of a sultan's favorite? You have known your fate since the moment the Kuzlar Aga, the chief black eunuch, appeared with his mute guards under the accusation of contamination of the bloodline. You are charged with violating the most sacred fundamental rule of the harem, betrayal of the sultan with a palace guard, a crime that threatened the very stability of the dynasty, ensuring that every subsequent punishment would be absolute. Yet you are innocent. You never touched the guard, and you loved the Sultan, or at least the idea of the life he offered. But your truth is irrelevant, because you failed to produce a son in 3 years, making you expendable. What mattered was that a rival had whispered the right venomous words into the right ear, the valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother. For in the Ottoman harem, innocence was merely an administrative inconvenience. What was the shocking logic behind the harem's deadly housekeeping? The punishment is clear. You will be sewn into the sack with the starving cats, and worse, the venomous snakes. The sack will be weighted with stones and plunged into the Bosphorus. Drowning will be the inevitable end, but the terror leading up to it is the true sentence. Your mind races back through the years. The sale at age 12, the training, the belief that elevation to the imperial household meant unimaginable luxury, and you understand now the terrifying cost of that golden cage. The same system that elevated you on silk cushions can destroy you on a word of jealousy. Confirming that this is not justice, but efficient housekeeping. The removal of a problem, proving that what is done to me tonight is severe suffering, not justice. The empire that mastered geometry and art perfected an anonymous form of execution reserved only for the Sultan's most intimate possessions. The bosi bashi approaches his large frame, radiating unquestioned authority, granting you the ultimate hollow concession. You may speak. If you have final words, you may speak them now. You consider begging, protesting, or cursing the rival Nurbanu, but instead a cold, hard truth emerges. I was never unfaithful. I would have given the Sultan's sons if he had given me the chance. What is done to me tonight is murder, not justice. The Bosibashi's face remains utterly unmoving. He has heard this declaration, this protestation of innocence from every woman who has faced this fate. And truth or lie, it makes no difference to him, as his duty is to the judgment already rendered, affirming that the job is not to judge, but to execute the judgment of others. Tonight we reveal the Ottoman history that was systematically suppressed. The history you are about to confront has been systematically suppressed. Ottoman historians keen to celebrate the glory of the imperial house preferred euphemisms over explicit horror. The archives of Topkapi Palace contain records of thousands of women who entered the harem only to vanish from documentation, their fates indicated by vague terms that scholars traditionally avoided. Tonight we examine the brutal reality behind those evasive phrases. The sack, drownings, the silent strangulations, the methods refined over 6 centuries of imperial rule, which was the system developed to control the most valuable yet most dangerous women in the Islamic world, defining the empire's shadow. Why did some women face a silk cord, while others faced drowning? The harem was not a monolithic entity. Its hierarchy determined the available punishments. The Sultan's 4 legal wives, the Khaduns, possessed formal status and protections, making their severe suffering rare and complicated, often facing the silent bowstring a more honorable end, or more often political exile to the old palace. The concubines, the Iqbals and Guzdes, like Mahide, were numerous, vulnerable, and ultimately expendable, and their deaths required less justification, allowing for rapid, discreet elimination. This distinction explains why some women were strangled with silk, while others were violently drowned in darkness. Their status dictated the severity and visibility of their tragic end. Forget the silks and perfumes. The golden cage was lined with silence and cold steel. The Western imagination often paints the Ottoman harem as a purely sexual playground, but this perspective misses its core function. It was fundamentally a political institution designed to solve the critical dynastic problem of succession instability. Every dynasty in history faced ruin through competing heirs by controlling all reproductive access to the Sultan. The harem ensured that only authorized children were born, and paternity was absolute. The stability of the world's largest Islamic empire depended on absolute certainty that no contaminated blood could ascend the throne, meaning the golden cage was, in truth, an intricate mechanism for manufacturing legitimacy. How was the terror inside the palace linked to order outside the walls? This reproductive control was paired with the ultimate solution to instability, ritual fratricide. Upon ascension, a new sultan was expected and later required by law to execute all his brothers, strangled swiftly with the bloodless silk cord. This horrific practice was only possible because the harem provided absolute certainty of paternity. If the identity of the sultan's sons was uncertain, the purge would become a genocide of all possible relatives, paralyzing the state. The harem's extreme measures against infidelity, the drownings and purges, were thus directly linked to the stability of the empire, ensuring the fear inside the palace ensured the order outside the walls. The silence of the executioners was the final terrifying luxury afforded to the condemned. At the pinnacle of this world stood the valid sultan, the sultan's mother. Having survived the system and successfully raised a son to the throne, her authority was second only to the sultan himself, and she ruled the women's quarters with absolute power, understanding precisely the high stakes of any transgression. For a concubine, the valid sultan was the most powerful and therefore the most dangerous enemy imaginable. Her word could initiate the investigation, pronounce the verdict, and demand the execution. Mahide's fate was sealed when the valid sultan, prioritizing dynastic safety over mere justice, chose to believe the politically convenient accusation, meaning her maternal protectiveness was the deadliest weapon in the harem. Who controlled the terror in the Sultan's private world? The administration of this terror was handled by the bureaucracy of the eunuchs. The Kuzlar Aga, the chief black eunuch, served as the primary administrator, disciplinarian, and chief prosecutor. His subordinates, sourced mainly from Africa and rigorously trained, were castrated before puberty to make them trustworthy guardians of the women's quarters, men who could have access without presenting a sexual threat. They managed the complex logistics of the harem, investigated violations, and wielded profound political power due to their access to the most private affairs of the imperial family, forming a core of surveillance whose physical incapacity was the measure of their trust. What secret language was used to orchestrate anonymous death? The Bosibashi commanded the Bostunku, the palace guards whose primary duty was not gardening but internal security and execution. His most specialized subordinates were the mutes, selected precisely because their inability to speak ensured the secrecy of state crimes. They could not testify about the condemned, nor could they betray the core location of the bodies. Their unique language of signs, developed specifically for palace service, allowed them to receive and execute the most sensitive commands in utter silence. So when the order came down, the Bosibashi and his silent men were the final, inescapable reality faced by the condemned. Showing how the beauty of the gardens concealed the necessity of discreet disposal, we return now to the chilling truth of descent into darkness. We return now to Mahide standing on the waterfront as the mutes move forward with an efficient, practiced choreography. They seize her arms, lifting her slightly before inserting her feet first into the dark canvas. The sudden movement disturbs the creatures within, and she feels them writhing, a chaotic, scaled terror against her legs. As the sack rises around her, closing over her shoulders, she is sealed in absolute darkness, folded tightly, her bound wrists useless. The shock of confinement is immediate, compounded by the frantic, starved panic of the animals sharing her prison. She is contained, isolated, and utterly vulnerable in the dark chamber of her death. Tonight you will hear the chilling truth of what happened inside the sack. The cats are the first to strike, their hunger and fear driving them madly. Claws rake across her calves and thighs, drawing blood that instantly intensifies their frenzy. Mahide's screams are choked and muffled by the heavy canvas. She cannot move, cannot protect herself. Simultaneously, the snakes begin to react, slower and more persistent, their bodies coiling around her limbs, seeking warmth. She feels their dry, rough scales sliding across her skin, one wrapping around her throat, another sliding across her face. Not immediate strikes, but defensive constrictions, responding to her terror and movement with their own primal instincts, meaning every frantic movement invites a fresh, burning pain. The Ottoman Harem was not a place of pleasure. It was a political machine whose efficiency was measured in the depth of the Bosphorus. The sack is quickly sewn shut, the coarse stitches sealing her fate. The final damning detail is added: stones, heavy river stones, attached to the base. This weight ensures there is no hope of floating, no chance of rescue, guaranteeing she will be dragged swiftly down to the depths. She feels herself lifted, the rocking motion adding to the internal chaos. Then comes the instantaneous moment of falling, the brief second of weightlessness followed by the brutal shock of cold. The sack plunges beneath the surface, the Bosphorus closing over her head, confirming the stones are the physical manifestation of the Empire's final judgment. In absolute darkness, she faced the inevitable invasion. The black water does not enter immediately, but seeps in steadily, relentlessly, saturating the canvas fibers, replacing the air with cold brine. The animals' frenzy intensifies. They feel themselves drowning. The cats claw desperately at anything within reach, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Mahide is bitten repeatedly, 11 times in the first 30 seconds. The venom burning, the pain agonizing, though not yet fatal. Her clothing and the water around her turn rapidly red from the deep gashes across her body. She gasps for air, a reflexive, involuntary action, inhaling the freezing, salty water, drowning in darkness, surrounded by creatures drowning with her. The system ensures not just death, but total, untraceable oblivion. Her final moments are a terrifying fusion of sensations: the cold, the agonizing pressure, the sharp, constant pain of the bites and scratches. The absolute knowledge that no one will ever know the specific horror of these minutes. Her consciousness fights the invading water, the burning in her lungs, until the reflex of breathing overrides all thought. Then only the dull, heavy pressure remains. The sack continues its silent descent, carried by the strong currents out into the Sea of Marmara, erasing all evidence of Mahid's existence. By the time the sun touches the minarets of Istanbul, no trace of her will remain, confirming the system ensures not just death, but total, untraceable oblivion. What ancient Roman punishment inspired the deadly Ottoman sack? The sack drowning was not a unique Ottoman invention. Its horrific history extends back to the Roman Empire, where it was known as the pena culae, the punishment of the sack. The Romans reserved this death for parricide, the murder of one's parents. The Ottomans adopted and adapted the ritual, applying it to women whose sexual transgression was viewed as dynastic parricide, the murder of the imperial bloodline's integrity. The choice of animals was profoundly symbolic: cats representing domestic betrayal, snakes representing the creeping contamination of infidelity. It was a historically sanctioned, symbolically appropriate method of elimination. The execution was not just punitive, it was pedagogical. The use of violence in the harem was not merely punitive, it was pedagogical. The witnessing was mandatory and deliberate. When a woman was condemned, the entire harem population was assembled to watch the punishment or observe the condemned being led away to their fate. The purpose was explicit: terror management. The administrators understood that controlling hundreds of women required not just guards, but profound psychological conditioning, the internalization of rules through the constant palpable threat of destruction. A woman who had seen the sack would self-police her every thought and action, proving fear was used as a meticulously calibrated tool of governance. How did repeated executions stop resistance? This repeated witnessing served to normalize the violence. The women exposed to executions, strangulations in the inner court, or the solemn march toward the waterfront had their capacity for shock depleted by repetition. This normalization made them less likely to resist the system and more likely to accept the prevailing logic that women who broke the rules deserved their fate. The pervasive surveillance system, driven by fear, transformed the harem into a panopticon where every woman watched every other woman, knowing that failure to report a potential transgression might imply complicity. Ensuring the isolation of individuals within the crowd prevented organized resistance. The victim disappeared, but the perpetrator thrived, inheriting the tools of destruction. The rival who orchestrated Mahideh's downfall was Nurbanu, a Venetian captive known for her ruthless ambition and intelligence. Mahideh's elimination, though successful, drew unwanted attention from the valid Sultan, who recognized Nurbanu's dangerous competence. Nurbanu adapted, cultivating patience until the valid Sultan's natural death 8 years later. Eventually, Nurbanu's son ascended the throne, and she became valid Sultan herself, wielding absolute authority over the harem. She continued to use the tools of accusation and elimination, ordering at least 12 executions during her tenure, consolidating her power through systematic, calculated purge. Proving the victim disappeared, but the perpetrator thrived, inheriting the tools of destruction. What was the shocking price of dynastic stability? The harem system persisted for 5 centuries until the abolition of the Sultanate. The violence was systematic, following established procedures and serving recognizable imperial functions, and spectacular, designed to be witnessed, creating pervasive terror. The women who died in the Bosphorus were, in the minds of the Ottoman administrators, sacrifices to dynastic stability. Their deaths were deemed the necessary price to prevent the civil wars that had torn apart other great empires. This ruthless calculation explains why the system resisted reform,
and why the cruelty was maintained with such bureaucratic efficiency, showing the system was designed to serve power rather than truth, and power always chose elimination. Why were the women who suffered essential to Ottoman greatness? We must look at this history without the filters of imperial propaganda. The same
attention to detail that made the Ottomans effective administrators of a vast empire made them equally effective administrators of domestic terror. The women who suffered were not incidental to Ottoman greatness, they were essential to it. Their controlled bodies ensured the purity of the bloodline and the stability of the succession. This was the truth created by the system that civilization and cruelty are often companions, expressions of the same underlying dynamic, where necessity is defined by the powerful. Remember Mahide. Remember the silence that followed the records that concealed. This video is created for educational and historical purposes. It examines themes of power, corruption, and human conflict without depicting explicit or graphic events. The lives of the women in the Ottoman harem offer a stark reflection on how seemingly rational political goals can justify unimaginable cruelty. We remember Mahide Devran not just as a victim, but as a lens through which to examine a system designed to destroy lives for the preservation of order. Her death reminds us that the logic of necessity, when unchecked, always consumes the vulnerable. If this made you question the cost of the past, you're welcome to continue the journey with us. Walk further into history's shadows.